Hello everyone, this is DC Pro Max from the Hackerbase, and finally we have reached JavaScript. This is the place, the great continuation, from which there is no turning back. And I absolutely guarantee you, if you understand my first two lessons, the path to coding is open to you. Because everything else over the years will be purely an addition, a correction, but the base, the foundation will be exactly in these two lessons. If you manage to understand, you'll get into it. That's it. Entry is guaranteed because I noticed from my experience that many stopped precisely at this part. But I tried to present it all in such a way that it would be as transparent as possible for you. And even if it's not transparent, that's why I created the Hackerbase on Telegram to additionally answer your questions and help you understand. On Telegram, I will literally make you understand everything. Even if you didn't understand many things I myself understood on the 10th try once. We will not start the first lesson with fun HTML pictures, but we will actually go through the basics and theory. And from the second lesson, we will start creating real functionality. Because if we don't go through the basics, nothing will work out. And even then, I would shorten these basics as much as possible. Later on, we will add more. What makes the JavaScript language interesting? The fact that knowing it lies not in understanding its advantages, but in understanding its disadvantages. JavaScript is a very specific language because it was literally created in a week or two. I don't remember exactly. And therefore, many mistakes were made. That's why there are so many different frameworks and extensions for JavaScript. But now we will proceed with pure JavaScript. Look, in our current project, I created a file called basics.js. There I described all the basic concepts of JavaScript and in general of programming languages, because overall programming languages are largely similar to each other. But before we start, we need to link this basics.js to our index.html, because although theory is theory, we will call a couple of functions. Let's go to our index.html. I logically separated the meta tags, more styles, and JavaScript for you. For this, we write script here. src equals and specify the path to it. Here is our script. Close the tag. That's it. Our script is connected. Let me close this so the panel with the open site doesn't bother you right now. First, well, naturally, where do we start? With JavaScript variables. A variable is an entity where we store some data. That is, we store some name, string, or number. Variables are declared in JavaScript using const, or let. How do they differ? Let is itself a simple variable, which without let you won't be able to define a variable like that, because you will get a runtime exception. Yes, you must declare the variable with let, then any variable name. For example, change my equals 1, and then as you can see with let, I can change it to 2. So initially this value was 1, then it will be 2. But if we used const from the word constant, we wouldn't be able to change it, because in that case it will give us an error that a constant cannot be changed. That's it. We figured out const and let. The difference is simple. Let can be changed dynamically. Const cannot. Previously in JavaScript, a variable called var was used very often. It was the only one, but it has many drawbacks. This variable is legacy, an old way of declaring a variable which has many shortcomings, and accordingly it was replaced by let and const. Well, you can still use var, no one forbids it, but nevertheless I don't recommend it, and I haven't seen it in many projects for a long time. Var has this feature where you can call a var variable like this, as shown here, before you declare it. And it will kind of work. Alright, let's move on to variable types. Let's start with primitives. Primitives are basic types that are stored in a memory cell by address. A specific value is stored at this address. Variables come in these types. The first is a number. You see, for example, length, weight 7.5. 16 bytes 7.5. In other programming languages, floating point numbers are usually called double, but in JavaScript it's also a number. And look, if it were another programming language, a regular, normal one, not JavaScript, variables would be declared in this way. Length, colon, number, indicating that it's a number, and accordingly the value. of this variable. Therefore, it's a number. Next, a string is very important. In a string, we can store some word, sentence, and so on. We can store a title or description there. For example, a post. Let's say we declared a variable using letColor, it equals yellow. In a normal programming language, we would declare it like this. Color, for example, :string, and this is called explicit typing. In JavaScript, there is dynamic typing, meaning it doesn't care. You can assign 12 here, then switch back to a string, anything. It dynamically understands what you want to assign to it. In other programming languages, you need to explicitly specify the type. This is for your basic understanding. Moving on. Boolean. Boolean, type variable. It can store two values, true or false. Truth or falsehood. That is, as it usually happens on websites when you load something. For example, you made a request to the server, and on part of the user interface, you, for instance, set from loading equals true. At this moment, while loading is true, we have some preloader working on the screen indicating that loading is in progress. Then, for example, once the data is received from the server in the code, you set loading to false. The loading window disappears, meaning this is what it's needed for. And again, I described roughly how it is declared in other languages, so you understand that this is a boolean followed by an undefined type and defined. What does this mean? It means the same as if we had written let not defined. I would just call it that, equals undefined. It's the same as this, meaning the variable is not defined. That is, we haven't assigned any value here, neither boolean, nor string, nor length. If we call it somewhere, in the future, it will tell us that the variable is undefined. Next, null. Null means an empty type of variable. If we want to assign an empty value to a variable, we specify null, which is, roughly speaking, empty. The values, despite the fact that I listed all these variables, are primitives, meaning they can store only one value. Each value is stored in a cell. It also relates to a primitive, but there is such a JavaScript error that you might encounter in the future. The type in JavaScript is object called object, meaning if we have string, boolean, and if I int, there is undefined null. It should be null, but null is an object, which is a tricky JavaScript error. Alright, we've dealt with primitives, now the second type, and in our case the last one is objects. How does an object differ from primitives? The difference is that they store not the actual value of the variables in the cell, but a reference to this variable, meaning it is a reference type. Let's figure it out. Look, suppose we have created such an object, const person, curly braces, and here we can store absolutely anything we want. First name Vasya, last name Shlemov, meaning first name, last name. We can, if we want, add age, for example, 31. So here we store data. In one object we can store a lot of data. Accordingly, in the future when we manipulate HTML, instead of writing all these posts manually in HTML, we will store them in objects to later insert them using JavaScript. I'll remove this age. And then I created person2, just an empty object, so you can see. It's all simple. Again, if something is unclear, I will add everything to the hacker base. All I need from you are questions. The second, also popular type of object, is called an array. You will work with arrays your entire life. With array objects, but probably more with arrays. An array is a set, a collection of some data. For example, you see we recorded car brands in the cars column. There are Saab, Volvo, BMW. That is, it's a set of data, a line, like a queue of data. Look at what I've noted here. Remember this for the rest of your life. As there's even a joke, programmers always count not from 1, but from 0. And that's because the indices in an array start not at 1, 2, 3, but at 0, 0, 1, 2. Remember, Dieu is like your own name. But despite all this, if we want to call a method like, for example, to find out the length of this array, cars.length hypothetically, it will give us length equals 3. That is, it counts the length as 1, 2, 3. This often causes some misunderstandings because the indices are, yes, 0, 1, 2, but the length is 3. You just need to remember this. Next, look, we have covered objects, we have covered arrays. You can also create an array that contains objects within it. See, we have an array called persons. It contains 3 objects. That is, these are essentially users. 3 users, each with a first name and last name. Vasya Shlemov, Sasha Belli, Kesha Pechelovodov. See, I assigned each an index 0 or 1. Here, it should be 2, a small mistake. 0, 1, 2. This array's length is 3. 1, 2, 3. It has 3 values. It's just that counting always starts from 0. And as usual, how array values are called. For example, if we wanted to get this element or that one from the array, we would call it like this. Parsons 0. That is, then we would get, if later we go to the console, I will show you how you can call and print all this. But now I'm showing you the basic theory. That is, for 1, if you wanted to get this element, it was to write persons, that is parse. If the first element is persons 0. That is, as we started, we then consider persons 1, then for 1, 2. If we want it like this, if we want to find out the length of this array, then length, and it will give us 3. Just like that. Next, the object. Date, new day. Yes, there we will dedicate a separate lesson at some point, because date, despite seeming simple, is actually quite confusing and complex. But what this date object will give us is not a failure in the script, it will simply return a string that contains your current time, year, month, day, week, depending on your time zone. I won't dwell on time, I just wanted you to know about it. Well, I also wanted to mention, I forgot one thing. In primitives, there is also a type called symbol. We won't dwell on it because in 99% of cases, you will never encounter it. But just so you know it exists, a symbol, roughly speaking, is a primitive. But it's an object that can store various other hidden objects within itself. This is what it's needed for. It's often used to create certain libraries. And accordingly, when a user creates their JavaScript scripts, so that they don't overwrite any properties of the library. For example, if there is a library that already contains a color and you want to overwrite this color, the library will break. This is where a symbol is needed for metaprogramming. Don't worry about it. It's purely for your knowledge, so that if you ever encounter it, you'll know what it is. What is a symbol used for? A symbol is used for metaprogramming, for creating libraries, and so on. At the moment, you don't need this. Alright, next we move on to functions. A function is the foundation of programming. Functions exist in all programming languages. Let's say a function is defined using the keyword function. And here I've written just simple function. Open parentheses, then opened curly braces. And what does this function do? It simply returns 1. That is, if we call this function, it will return to the console. 1, return 1. You can do everything like this, return the date. So such a function will return today's current date and the current second. Okay, well then the interesting part begins, without which we cannot live. Add console. If we open the browser again, go to index.html where we connected our basics. Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P. Live preview. Okay, good. So look. Now we will finally work with the developer console. What is it? Click here. Open DevTools pane. In the browser, this opens with F12 on the page, just so you know. It doesn't matter if you have a Mac or Windows. Look, there are a bunch of errors here. What can we do? Look, here is a section. It controls what type of messages are shown in the console. Errors, warnings, info. In Airbus, this is debug. That is, if you want to print something to track it. Let's remove errors for now. Yes, let's remove the errors. I will now show you, look, to demonstrate what the console can do. I created a function for you. Test console. Console, there are several types. You can make a console log so that it prints, shows directly. Console log prints in info. Don't pay attention to all of this. It found it, and on the server, everything prints as console. Warning. Here is console warn, abbreviated. Warn is equivalent to debug. That is, we can purely filter. I'll also show you what it is, and error. To be honest, whenever I want to debug, I always write error. I like it more, it highlights in red. If I call the test console at the very end of the file, it's already called. Here, I'll remove this yo tested. Let's do it one by one. All of this, control or command. /pomis for commenting everything. You can highlight and command / in this direction as a command. Plus, like this to comment if you just need it here, I'll write it. You press, and you highlight, press, and also highlight, and you can easily uncomment. First look, I printed the console. Here's another fact. To clear the console, delete everything previous. either by right-clicking and clearing the console or a joke. Now on Mac, the command is on Windows, if I'm not mistaken, I just don't remember. On Windows, it's Control-L. It's just that when you switch to Windows, I have to look separately because on Windows it's often different. I'll clear the console. I want to reload our site. As you can see here, I wrote call function. Here we call functions. I have already written many functions in advance. You will understand everything. Look, I added a console log with a string parameter, log lengths of type lengths. What does this mean? Remember here, I set a variable called lengths. Here it is. I want to print it out to see what it is in order to print everything together. There is such a thing, ++ is concatenation. You can concatenate as much as you want. Concatenate among themselves, see what happens. You see long length colon, this is this part. Concatenations is this part. Length is 16. 16. Why is it? Yes, here is 16, you see, I printed it. I'll remove this so as not to confuse you. I just want it to look nice. Long length colon plus length. I want to add a space to make it clearer. Okay, I'll clear the console again. Alright, look, you can set the console to warn, watch here for example. Console error. Now I'll show you why I'm doing this. This is actually very important. Console. Debug. Look, right now only info and verbose are working. Reloading the page. Look, it showed us. Because according to the levels we have verbose, it showed us this debug, it showed us info, this is console.log, and it showed us errors. Let's connect everything and run it one by one. So for example, this is how you can filter. And yes, you see, this is what I printed here. It filters, warning is also there. You see in the ribbon with info. It's just a way to present in the console. Yes, as convenient for you for debugging, that's all. I'll delete all this. Then, look, I printed for P, console debug. I printed last name. I'll clean the console again. It gets spammed like this. Here, last name Johnson. And where I wrote down last name, there's Johnson. You see, printed in the console, debug. I specified last name. Here we see. Okay, yeah, well, let's not do first name now, although we can see what was done next. Remember, we have an object with parsing. And if it's Vasya, I'll show you right away what I did. I took it, called it with parsing, called it in the passport to see through the dot, specified in the base, and changed from Vasya to Sergey. Then I went further, I console, I just printed this object, passport, and you will see that it changed. Because if it's Sergey, now they are Vasya. But if they remove this year Perry assignment, you see back, Vasya became, I will now remove these logs in airbose. Info. Alright, I removed the info logs so they don't bother us. Next in the debug. You see there's Vasya. If I return it again, it becomes Sergey again. With Ctrl+S when I save, you see it reloads. You see the page reloads automatically. If you want to forcibly reload everything together, hover your mouse here and press Command-Ctrl+R. Like this. And that's it. So let's remove the warnings too. I'm doing it right away, so everything is clear to you. Let's only have errors. Alright, we'll only print errors. Well, maybe in the info? No, in the info we have a bunch of nonsense. We'll only print errors. Alright, so you saw how you can access an object, change it, and immediately print it. Look, remember I told you about lengths? Persons lengths 3. We called persons, and it printed 3 for us. Oh, and here's the most interesting part, date. Let's look here at what it will give us. In order to see, we need to enable it somewhere. Maybe it issued a warning. Look, you see the date. It gave us Saturn and November 16th, which is the time zone of James, plus inside, in short. Here it gave us a detailed date, which contains the exact current second. Previously, we talked about how you can check the type in JavaScript. I told you that JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, meaning we don't have to explicitly define types. It understands, but still, however, we can check the type of any variable in JavaScript. Let's, for example, let's literally check the length of this variable. Test console. I'll comment it out for now so it doesn't bother us. Let's check the check type function. You see, here, you need to pass a variable to this function. Pass the variable. And here in the console, you need to write type of this magical word. It will help us extract the type of this variable. So now you will see everything in a live example. We call the check type function and pass length here. Here we pass a parameter, a function. There are functions with parameters, and there are those without. Clear the console. When I entered it incorrectly, I'll reload now. So I advise adding it everywhere. I might have missed a semicolon somewhere. Look, the type is number. It gave us everything. The type is number. If you ever need to check a variable for its type, here it will output weight as well, type number. Next, color, type string, and so on. It will output boolean. Here it will output undefined, but here notably it's a JavaScript error because I created a variable called empty. It will now output object, although it should output something else, which is incorrect. Date, by the way, is also of type object. We've already covered this. These are objects. In general, this is how you can check the type of a variable. Sometimes it is useful in JavaScript. It is really in demand in real-time examples with the function. We used further and equality to check if one variable is equal to another. Let me show you something and together we'll write a poll. Check equality with function. Suppose we need to check if this variable is equal to that one. But we see they are different, right? So they are not equal. How is that? Let's say check the function, for example, value 1. This is what we want. We are now setting that this function must necessarily, but we must now pass two parameters into it, 1 and 2. Look, now we will print in Ilya 1, 2, 3 equals value 2. I will now explain why 3 does not equal 2. This is very important. So, clear the console, check quality. Now we will call the function. Let's comment this out just in case we need it during this lesson or not. Check. Quality term 2 variables we want to verify lengths and white, passing lengths. Then white, false. You see, it tells us that the variables are not equal. Definitely a semicolon. JavaScript works without a semicolon, but it's better to use it as many projects require this style of code. False is not equal. But look, if I change it to say 16, white, it will give us a hint they are all equal. You see, we checked these two variables, so you can check like this. Suppose you receive some value from the server. Some number 123, you can on the front end, on your side. If, for example, number 3, we will render one element, number 2, another. So this is how we check on quality. Okay, look at this thing. Let's, return this back, as I told you. The JavaScript language is a dynamically typed language. Let's create a variable str number, meaning a number that will be stored. Like this, as a string, not as a number, as a string. Do you see the point? So essentially they are the same, but if we check them, str number weight, here, 7.5, str number 7.5. Let's put str number here. Let's check these two variables. But in fact, it's like comparing a combine harvester to a doghouse, but nevertheless. Look, here we will write weight. Now I'll clear the console. It shows us false, which is fair. Well, how can they be equal if one is a string and the other is a number, you see? But you see, triple equals. This is called strict type comparison. But there's this thing in JavaScript, double equals. If we use double equals, it will show us true. Do you know why? Because with double equals, JavaScript, it doesn't care about the type at all. That is, it converts one of these types, either into a string like this when comparing, or conversely it converts this one into a number. I don't remember exactly which into which. In general, it doesn't care about the type with double equals. Therefore, I highly recommend not using double equals. Forget it, historically it just happened to exist. Always check using triple equals with strict typing, so you understand the difference between double equals and triple equals, right? How to check for not equal. Look, if we want to check for not equal, we need to put an exclamation mark instead of 1 equals. I'll write it down for you now. Forget about the double equals right away. Here you see double equals, but we are still checking strictly, because if we weren't checking strictly, it would be like this. In general, remember only 2 cases. Don't bother yourself with more. Strictly check for equality with triple equals, and strictly check for inequality, exclamation mark and double equals. It gives us, you see, true. So what does this mean? This tells us it is not equal to that. Just like that. We check that it is not equal. Okay, let's move on from this. It's called JavaScript, logical, but operators. There are actually many of them, but we will go along the way. I will add everything later. For now, we are specifically going through the basics. Well, And next, probably the most important thing. This is, dare I say what probably supports 80% of the internet and the web. Probably if the old timers of programming were here, they would throw eggs at me, but that's definitely how it is, damn. Indeed, these are loops. The for loop. All frameworks and so on, everything relies on the for loop. Seriously. What a for loop is, you will understand now. I created 3 functions to demonstrate the for loop. So we will comment this out now. You can just play around with all of this yourself later, and whatever is unclear, we'll discuss in the hacker base. Let's start with the simplest loop. A loop is a way to iterate over values that are in a sequence. For example, you can iterate over this array. Just listen for now and you'll understand later. You can iterate over this array of objects. What this means is that we refer to person. We write for each. Now let me call it, make sure you understand verbose, so that verbose is visible. You see, I'm printing here in debug, so verbose needs to be enabled. Look what I did with for each, it printed. I will go from the end, just to avoid confusion. You see, hello from pure for each loop. This is called a pure for each loop. I write here person, so when we iterate using for each, what does this mean? We go sequentially through each element. 1, 2, 3. And this reference persons, you need to grasp this, understand with your mind what it is. This is a reference to each element in the sequence. 1, 2, 3. And you see, when we print person to the console, it sequentially gives us each character. 1, 2, 3. That is, it iterates, roughly speaking. And right in the loop, look what we can do. So that you finally understand how to change person. Dot. First name equals changed. In loop, change the type, and I wrote changed in the loop. If we call console debug again after the loop and print this person's object, look at what it prints for us. It returned an array of these objects. See, it fixes the custom loop because we went through each element. 1, 2. And changed it. That is her. Like this. So, we requested a loop through the persons and it gives us a reference to each of these elements. If this is still unclear, I will show you. It's similar to if we did it like this, we have an array. Remember I told you that you can access an array. Let me comment this out. While I told you that you can access an array directly, persons, to the first element. Yes, persons, we accessed the first one with index 0. Dot, first, name equals. Changed inline. I'll write it down. Yeah. So we changed it in an inline format, like changed inline. Look, it's already printing for us. See, we only changed the first element. Then we can also change the second one. Changed inline. Now we are finishing up. Change the second one. 2. Changed inline. All done, we changed all 3. And the loop gives us the advantage that we can do this easily if we remove all the unnecessary stuff. Like this. See? There. We are taking this now. Look, you see change dn loop. Just one line. Simply because we went through this entire array or like this, which is incorrect. I just showed you an analogy of what happened. I hope it's clear this time. I'm going back because this is for your lesson. I'm deleting this. That's all. This is the simplest for each loop. Next, I've already talked to you about indexes. In for each, you can also get the index. Watch. Let's change our function. Let's comment this one out and call a new one. Now I will clear the console. So we got something interesting because I accidentally wrote persons here. You can't do that because it will overwrite. You can simply write something understandable. Beginners often write item or thing in courses. Look at what we printed here, you see, in for each. There is also a reference to the index. It can provide the index. If here we just have persons without brackets, then here we open the brackets. The first parameter is exactly this item, like here, person. And the second parameter, separated by a comma, is the index. You see, it directly gives it to us. 0 is our Vasya, 1 is our Sasha, and 2 is our Kesha. Here it gives us the index. You see, it's counted, index 0. What I told you, now you see in a real example. And look, here's the trick. Remember, I told you that you can, well, as I showed you, if we directly changed person here, person, first name, but when we have access to the index, look at what we can do. We can change the first name in 2 ways. We can take this, as we did, only instead of passing the site. I just changed the name, you understand? Only the name to differentiate, and it's not simple. Let's print here. We'll print the result. It gave the final result. Changed in index. Loop, in the indexed loop, change index loop. You see, it's the same when we have the index. Look at what we can do. Let's start here. With index loop, it will now print persons. So it printed. At the very end, you see, everything worked. And the second way, when we have the index, we can do this. Persons is our object. This one I will always remind you of here. So, where's our function? Persons. Next, considering that we have the index, you see we have 0, 1, 2, we can directly refer to the index. First name, you see this one. And this is exactly the same one-to-one, because we are doing it one-to-one. More convenient, of course, and more readable. So, well, there are often cases when you need to do this through the index. So again, I will show you. See here. We can basically do everything in one line. If we did the same thing, persons, index 0, first name equals this one, 1, 2. This is the same, it just outputs. Immediately with a loop here, it goes sequentially. And plus, imagine if you have 100 elements under sale, like 100 people. You wouldn't write it manually like this, would you loop it? It goes through automatically, regardless of the number of elements. We delete this. I understand at first glance it may seem more confusing, but later we will provide explanations. If anything, the second lesson will be clearer because I will apply this on our page. Now, in this case, yes, considering that we did it through the index, just remember, you see, it lights up in gray. This means that this variable is not used, according to the best code style practices. We need to put an underscore like this, which means we are not using this variable. Now it highlights correctly, you see, and I will just comment it out. This is for your knowledge. Item, okay. We have just figured out for each. Usually without an index, it's simple. And for each with an index, where we can get the index further. That is, if you understand this foundation, you can basically move on to mobile. This is purely the foundation of programming. The basics are more or less similar in all languages, except for some of the most unusual languages. I won't name them to avoid causing negativity among other programmers. And lastly, let's go through the classic. So the Yombin for loop is the most classic loop we have. That's where it all started. The same loop is used in languages like C and C++. It's just a classic. You can use it like this, or you can use for each. Look, here's the thing. Reloaded, here it is too. You see, it gives the same thing. Hello from for loop. If you don't see something in the console, always go here and check what's enabled, because I was there. I didn't notice then that I hadn't enabled it. Here I print one hello from for loop. You see, it prints hello from for loop. It prints the index 0, 1, 2, and it prints persons, and it's the same as the index here, just more often. For each is written index, and here it's written for brevity because you see it's already long. What does this mean? That's all. Just remember. For loop starts at the beginning. Let I equals 0. This means we set the start of the index from where we will start. That is, we will start, roughly speaking, from here with 0. You can set it to 1, so we will start, for example, from 1 if we want. But often no one uses it. Often it's not necessary, we just start from 0. Second, it's up to which element we want to go. Less than. Right now there's no need to understand much, just remember. Persons. This is our object that contains persons. Length, it's length. What does this mean? It means that this means that we will loop through from here to here. That is, go through the entire thing. a classic one. For loop here, everything that needs to be specified, and also a semicolon and plus. Plus means that each time go 1, 2, 3 to each subsequent value. Just remember this and that's it. Then accordingly, this will be the same as the index here. After all, for is more human readable, while for loop is less human readable, but there are cases when the for loop is indispensable. Perhaps we will have such examples, but not about that now. In general, everything is the same because I read persons, I get the index. Value, it will print the same way as if I did persons. In first name equals changed in for loop. The code followed the semicolon rule. And now I want to print console, debug. Print to console, there. End of log, I turned off. There's so much printed with this server. Therefore, I print smoothly in console debug. And now I printed persons. Here, chen4, everything changed inside, you see. So everything is roughly speaking identical. Let it be. I'll leave it here for you. Just in case there's another loop, I didn't add it here. Well, let's do it now. Let's add function smoke for of loop. These are just variations. You can use whatever you want. Furov, this is a simpler version of the for loop. Let's again use an item such as of simple persons. Console debug, we print item. Demo Furov, I'll just explain now. Let's now please clear console. So the video printed for us the same way. All this means that here with this let item, it's the same as in the speech. This item, you see, it's just a reference to each and each. This is called iteration. When we go through each element in the array, it's called iteration. This means that we will iterate over the object person. We can change it if we're tired of these cars. A primitive regular array can be iterated through with cars. You see, it prints everything in the list for you. That's it. In Swift, by the way, they also use for there. For of. Very similar, identical. Look how simple it is. You can also get the index in this for of, but I don't want to delve into that right now. We don't need that right now. This will be more than enough for you for now. This will be more than enough for you. The console is really scary. You often open some projects and there are dozens of logs in the console. That's why you need to filter. I would gladly use console log right now. But this server we're opening has already spammed the entire console log. That's why I don't print to the log. Log equals info, I print to webboss, I print to debug, which is less, if anything. Send your screenshots to the hacker base under the video and I'll show you what's what. So, if I find an error, I'll point out where it's wrong. Why did I even mention that these loops are needed? These loops are needed so that, for example, we have, look, from the server, we receive objects like this. These objects come directly from the server, roughly speaking, from the internet via HTTP. When they arrive, we need to render them on the front end. And accordingly, we will render this using loops. Next, in the following lesson, what will we do? Inside the loop, when we have access to each element of the array, we will add to our DOM element. This is called DOM, Document Object Model. We will dynamically add elements, not print in HTML, but directly from JavaScript. This is how everything works. This is called imperative programming. Similarly, in Swift technology, web UIKit, UIT Android, it all happens in much the same way, directly from the code. You insert elements into the UI, so this knowledge will be useful to you. I know today was very complex, right? But I tried, believe me, to be as concise as possible and explain it clearly. Similarly, accordingly, I will attach this repository. Attach this lesson in SANDBOX and you will be able to open this code and view it, download it for yourself and test it on your own. Because there's nothing better than experiencing it firsthand. Well, and even if you don't want to try it yourself, in the next lesson you can follow along with me. And we will. There you'll definitely have to get hands-on because we need to continue improving our website, our application. So for those who are not yet in Hacker Base, make sure to subscribe to Hacker Base. The channel is still open. There is already a lot of additional material on building a career, on programming, things that won't be on YouTube or anywhere else. So you will find that there and you can communicate with me there. So scan the QR code and the bot will direct you to the channel. or go through using the link under the video. I will attach the sandbox with this code in the description. This was DC Pro Max from HackerBase. Thank you for watching this lesson.